Are you upset with me or something?
He just brought his Ferrari home in 5th place, clawing back from a grid penalty, salvaging a difficult weekend. And on the slowdown lap, after a maze of confusing radio messages, Hamilton asked his engineer one simple question. And nobody answered. Because that silence wasn't personal. It was the entire story of Lewis Hamilton's first season at Ferrari compressed into one radio channel. This is the story of the man who broke that silence. Not with words at first, but with one phrase, quietly said before the 2026 Monaco Grand Prix, that changed everything the world thought it knew about Hamilton's second act. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why a 52-year-old engineer nobody had heard of in years became the most important hire Ferrari has made since Hamilton arrived. When Lewis Hamilton signed for Ferrari, the world expected a coronation. Instead, he got a car he couldn't read, and a voice in his ear he couldn't sync with. His new race engineer was Riccardo Adami, a respected Italian who had guided Sebastian Vettel and Carlo Santi. On paper, the perfect appointment. In practice, something never quite clicked. Over and over, all season long, the same question crackled over Ferrari's radio. Where is all that time? Hamilton asked some version of it at least 21 times. At Monaco, it wasn't frustration, it was confusion. Adami told him, "This is our race." Hamilton heard it as a shot at victory. What Adami actually meant was the opposite. Hamilton was free to run his own strategy. By the time the gap to the leaders appeared on his dash, the damage was already done. Confused and worried he'd upset his engineer, Hamilton asked over the radio on the slowdown lap, "Are you upset with me, or something?" Silence. The exact moment you saw at the start of this video. In Miami, frustration turned to sarcasm. Have a tea break while you're at it. Then came the season finale in Abu Dhabi. More track limits warnings, crossed wires, Hamilton exasperated. "Stop telling me I'm racing people. I know I'm racing him, man, just leave me to it." But it was what happened after the race that mattered most. Hamilton thanked his team over the radio. "Grazie a tutti," he said. "Thank you for your kindness. I'm grateful for all the hard work." And nobody answered. He tried again. "Did you get that message?" The one time you don't reply. The same silence. The same season playing out one more time, right down to the very last lap. There were flashes of promise, a strong 4th place at Imola, a sprint win in China. But they were exceptions, not the pattern. For 18 consecutive seasons, Lewis Hamilton had stood on a Formula One podium, every single year of his career. In 2025, for the first time ever, he didn't stand on one, not once. And underneath every awkward exchange with Adami sat the same unspoken comparison. The seamless, decade-long partnership Hamilton had left behind at Mercedes. A partnership with a man named Peter Bonington. Bono. Nobody said his name out loud, but everybody was thinking it. Even outside the team, people noticed. Former Ferrari driver Rubens Barrichello, watching from the sidelines, put it bluntly. The back and forth on the radio should have stayed behind closed doors, not been broadcast to millions. January 16th, 2026. Ferrari made it official. Riccardo Adami was moving on, reassigned to the team's junior academy. Hamilton would start the most important season of his career with a brand new voice in his ear. 10 days. That's all the notice Ferrari gave itself before the first pre-season test in Barcelona. There was no long-term replacement ready. Just a name almost no one outside the paddock recognized. Carlo Santi, 52 years old, a mechanical engineer from Verona who had joined Ferrari's vehicle dynamics department decades earlier, trained at the same research center where Fiat once shaped its own engineers. Long before anyone in the paddock knew his name, Santi was the man behind the scenes, building Ferrari's earliest driver-in-the-loop simulators, running vehicle dynamics data that never made a headline. Then, in 2018, he stepped onto the pit wall itself as race engineer for Kimi Räikkönen in what would be his final season wearing red. It ended with a win in Austin, Räikkönen's last Formula One victory. A quiet, respectable chapter. And then Santi stepped back into the shadows again. For years afterward, he worked from what insiders at Maranello called the remote garage, a factory-based support role, running numbers from a screen instead of a headset. Now, with 10 days' notice, Ferrari pulled him back in. Hamilton himself made it clear this wasn't the plan. It's actually quite a difficult period because it's not long-term. Early on into the season, it's going to be switching up again, and I'll have to learn to work with someone new. So that's detrimental to me too. Everyone in the paddock believed they already knew how this would end. Word had spread that Ferrari was already grooming a permanent replacement, a young performance engineer poached from McLaren's championship-winning operation, someone who had helped build the data behind Oscar Piastri's rise. Carlo Santi wasn't the answer. He was the placeholder before the answer. A veteran wheeled out for a handful of races, just long enough for the real plan to fall into place. At least, that's what everyone assumed. The season began, and the switch never came. Race after race, Santi stayed on the pit wall. No fireworks, no headline-grabbing radio friction. Just calm, precise, unhurried communication, the exact opposite of everything that had defined 2025. By Miami, 5 races in, Santi was still there. The McLaren rumour gradually faded from the paddock chatter. No one was asking about a replacement anymore, because something was working. Hamilton wasn't asking, "Where is all that time?" anymore. Ahead of the Monaco Grand Prix, one of the most personal, pressure-soaked weekends on the calendar, Hamilton was asked about his engineer. "I feel Carlo is like my Italian Bono." 8 words. That's all it took. For anyone who followed Hamilton's career, that name means everything. Bono wasn't just an engineer at Mercedes. He was the calm in the storm through 6 world championships, the voice Hamilton trusted with his life at 300 kilometers per hour. To compare anyone to Bono, after only a few months together, wasn't a throwaway compliment. It was Lewis Hamilton telling the world, "I found it again." And the results followed. Multiple podiums, a driver climbing back into championship contention. No longer the man fighting silence on the radio, but a genuine threat at the front of the grid. The man Ferrari pulled out of a factory office with 10 days' notice, the placeholder, the stand-in, the name no one had heard of, became the answer nobody saw coming. There's a lesson buried in Ferrari's radio archives, if you listen closely enough. Sometimes the loudest crisis in a team isn't the car. It isn't the results. It's the silence between 2 people who are supposed to trust each other completely. Lewis Hamilton spent a season searching for that trust in all the wrong places. A promising resume, an experienced engineer, a system that should have worked on paper. He found it instead in a 52-year-old engineer nobody was betting on. A man who once built simulators no one saw, engineered a win most fans have long forgotten, and disappeared from the spotlight for years. Brought back on 10 days' notice. Not chosen, inherited. Nobody at Maranello planned for Carlo Santi to be the story of 2026. He wasn't on a shortlist. He wasn't the exciting new hire from a rival team. He was simply the man closest to the phone when Ferrari needed someone, fast. Riccardo Adami is now shaping Ferrari's next generation of junior drivers. The McLaren engineer everyone expected never arrived. And Carlo Santi is still on the pit wall, guiding a 7-time world champion into the twilight of his career. And somewhere between the silence in Abu Dhabi and 8 words before Monaco, Lewis Hamilton got his voice back. Was it luck? Or did Ferrari finally learn what Mercedes always knew, that in this sport, chemistry wins as many races as horsepower? You decide.